If you lead a more purposeful life, you're 2.5 times less likely to get dementia when you're older. You are 22% less likely to exhibit the triggers for a stroke. What? Personal purpose is about doing things that matter to you. There's benefit to living a purposeful life. I'm Collings. I'm an experienced chief executive. Women have more career interruptions than men. That is just a fact. We go through childbirth. We have to come into work and return as working mothers, need to go and express milk. We also then go through menopause. I worked all the way up to the day before my C-section. Women have a fear that if they speak out and say something, it might damage their career. As a chief executive, if they happen to me, then they will definitely happen to other people. We have to create environments where women actually feel comfortable. More men need to step up to be allies.
Welcome to the Virtuous Mindset.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. I was just thinking about the Teams call that we had a couple of weeks ago, and we covered so many interesting topics. So I'm really excited to get stuck in. But before I do, as a CEO, what does it mean to you to have a virtuous mindset?
So if I break it down and think about virtues, then it's about the morals and the standards that we hold as being important. And for me, mindset is all about the attitude that we have and the way that we show up as a human, about how you create empathy and understanding and put yourself in someone else's shoes and the connection. And in my life, being a leader is one of the greatest privileges that I've had. And if I can bring all of that together to help someone grow by opening their mind, by having the right morals and standards in the way in which they approach their world of work, then that for me is ultimately a brilliant success.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you come across incredibly authentically. And I think that's so important, especially with a lot of your posts online. I've noticed that for sure. But before we go any further, can you provide us a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, happy to. So I'm Collings. I'm an experienced chief executive. So the last 5 years of my career I've spent in energy. I have worked in lots of industries that are kind of adjacent in that energy transition to net zero. So automotive, property, retail, home improvement. I had a slightly alternative route to becoming a CEO in that I have come up the path of being a strategic marketing communications professional. You find lots of CEOs who are accountants, but that's not the route that I've taken.
No, that's interesting. And we were just talking about it just earlier, that you've taken an unconventional route and that you don't have to pursue a specific route in order to get to the end result.
No.
So I think that's important. But what I really want to do is start from the beginning of your journey, because you're clearly really successful. You've achieved so much. And when I was watching one of your interviews, I was trying to piece together, I suppose, what traits and characteristics have made you who you are today. And you're someone that, from the interview, you come across as incredibly ambitious, very hardworking, and you always go the extra mile. At least that's what you say in the interview. So talk to me a little bit about your earliest context in life in terms of your upbringing and background.
Yeah, so when I think right the way back to being a young child and I think about the environment I grew up in, so my mum and dad, their family's all Eastern European, so obsessed with food, but really warm home, really loving environment, quite nurturing and having really strong values in that sense. I had a brother. So there were two of us growing up, and my mum came to this country, couldn't speak any English. So even though she trained as an accountant in her country, when she came here, she knew no English. And so she worked in a factory and went to night school because she wanted to learn English. So this kind of really strong commitment to learning and that work ethic in order to fit in your environment and actually to grow and develop kind of starts with my mum. And my dad worked in the same job for nearly 40 years, and then he was made redundant and had to change, but he would have, I think, stayed in the same company for his entire career had he been given that option. Again, really, really strong work ethic. And the one thing that they instilled in both me and my brother was that education was fundamental, really important to have a really great education. And so they made lots of personal sacrifices to make sure that we had a great education. So I went to a grammar school, but I actually failed my exam. I failed my entrance exam, the 11 plus, and my dad appealed and he fought to get me a place because he believed that that was really important. And I always felt like this huge pressure because I'd not passed the exam. Did I earn that place? Was I good enough to be there? And I don't know if that really drove me, but that kind of real sense that I had to deliver back to him. Another memory I've got slightly before that is when I was in middle school, I was awarded a trophy for the most outstanding girl of my year in that year of leaving.
Okay.
And when I was talking to my mum about this in preparation for the interview, she said, "Oh, you remember you got that trophy?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I can't actually remember being that outstanding or being that special that I would deserve this." And it was huge. It was really big trophy. When I was talking to my mum about it, she was saying, "Yeah, but you were always nose in a book. You were always curious. You were always wanted to be really ambitious. You always wanted more." I was the pond monitor, and I had to go and feed the fish and take the temperature and all these things and really like volunteering for absolutely everything. So back then it was about doing more, being busy, being really active. My life was always really full. Going back to the school and the GCSEs, I remember that I was doing GCSE art, and I loved art. I was really creative, and I wanted to, at that point, 16-year-old, be an interior designer. Like in my head, that's what I wanted to do. Decided that was it, and my art teacher said to me that I wasn't good enough.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that point, I was devastated. I was floored by that comment. And I had to leave the school and went somewhere else for A-levels because I was so upset by the fact that she'd said it. And it really stuck with me. And it wasn't actually until COVID, and we were all forced to stay at home, that I painted again.
Okay,
And
it took you that long.
I actually left it, yeah. And it was really funny because I decided, actually, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to pursue this thing that I really love because someone has told me that I wasn't good enough. And I ended up doing A-levels in English, politics, economics, like things that are as far away from art as you could possibly get. And well, not that I was unhappy or that I didn't enjoy what I was doing. But I think that profound impact of someone saying something to you that then charts a completely different direction in your career, in your life, that can have that impact is quite an interesting, particularly in those formative years. So that's another memory that really stands out from my childhood.
Do you regret that decision in terms of not pursuing perhaps the creative route, of going down the art route, which is what you described just now?
So I think I found it anyway because I ended up working in marketing, and I went and worked in advertising agencies, and I made TV commercials, and I travelled the world, and it was brilliant. And so I had that creative opportunity and that avenue to kind of express myself. And I didn't end up doing what I thought I was going to do. And I don't really regret anything. I think there are things that you do and things you don't do. And that's my philosophy. And I have the same philosophy with my children. I said, you will make choices, and sometimes you will think, actually, maybe I should have made a different choice. But don't regret anything, because it gives you a lesson and it teaches you something. And I'm glad now that in COVID, I decided to go back to it, because it allowed me to almost exercise some demons that maybe were there that I didn't really realise were affecting me or holding me back in some kind of small way.
Yeah. You mentioned also that there are certain things that you should do and there are certain things that you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Where do you think that really comes from? And what do you mean by that? What should you not be doing?
Well, it's about the choices that you make.
Right.
So I mean, we're going to talk a lot about purpose, because that's obviously something that's really important to me. But when you have a strong frame of reference and a clear purpose in your life, it becomes really obvious what you should and shouldn't do. It helps you to make better decisions, and it becomes easier because something feels good or it doesn't, or it fits in your context or it doesn't. And for people that lack that clarity and that clear direction, it's hard. It's really hard. And particularly, I think, when you are trying to find your way or solve a situation. And if you don't have that strong destination or anchoring in terms of what you're trying to achieve, then those decisions are harder.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something that we're going to definitely talk about and touch on. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about the career interruption, which is something that you have mentioned to me previously. And I guess you described it as a career defining moment, or at least that's what you said in the interview. So talk to us a little bit more about that time in your life.
Yeah. So I'd been to university, and coming from a modest background, I couldn't afford to go away to university. So I decided to stay at home. I worked all the way through my degree. So when lots of my peers were going out and having a great time, I was working. And so when I got to the point that I could go and find a job and could afford to go and flee the nest almost, I decided, right, that's it. I'm going to go far away. Went and found a job in advertising because I thought that looks really cool. And actually, I'd really like to go and do that. And I met my first husband. Mm-hmm. And we got pregnant, and at 7 months pregnant, I was found myself without a job. Mm-hmm. So that was really challenging because I was, quite big, going out and looking at what was I going to do, because I couldn't sit there for 2 months and do nothing. That just wasn't me. I'd always worked and really ambitious. And so I started contracting for an absolutely lovely agency, did loads of great work, worked all the way up to the day before my C-section.
What?
Yep. Day before, literally left the office at, I think, 7 o'clock that night.
Oh,
and then
my
I was
God.
in at 7 o'clock. I'm not advocating this.
Superwoman.
I'm not advocating this. It gets worse, Shivani. It gets worse. After 2 weeks, I was so bored that I went back to work. I'd had a C-section and I was working from home 2 weeks, because babies sleep all the time when you just have them.
Yeah.
And when you've been so busy, like, what do you do? What do you do with yourself? Like, your husband's gone back to work and there's nothing to do, and you're at home and this baby's sleeping, and you just find yourself there. And anyway, so I said to the agency, please just give me something to do. So I started working again. Anyway, it wasn't too long after, really, that my marriage started to break down, and I ended up finding myself as a single mother.
Okay.
With my daughter. And I had to make compromises, which thankfully nowadays women have much more flexibility than I did in those days. But I ended up having to find a job that gave me the flexibility that I needed to be able to look after my daughter. Mm-hmm. And that came with a fairly significant pay cut. Mm-hmm. So when I think about that career interruption and what was going on in my life at the point, I needed support and I needed to look after my daughter, and that was a priority for me. But I also needed to be fulfilled, and I needed to make sure that I, as an individual, was happy, because if I was happy, then she would be happy, and we would have a great life, and everything would be okay, and you get this lovely equilibrium. So I ended up working somewhere that gave me that, but it came at a price, and that always sat uncomfortably with me. And so when I have gone into my latter years of leadership, and I've seen people in those sorts of situations, I've used my experiences to help better support them. And I think when I talk about career interruptions, women have more career interruptions than men. That is just a fact. We go through childbirth, we have to come into work and return as working mothers, and need to go and express milk and have an environment where we can go and do that. We also then go through menopause, and that affects us, and we need to have the right support and policies in place to enable us to do that, and all of those things. So there are more career interruptions, but those career interruptions don't stop you being a valuable employee or a valuable human being, actually. And so how do we, in the world of work and in the kind of context of being supportive employers, but also be human, help people with those career interruptions.
When you were going through that time of having to take a pay cut, how did you cope from a mental standpoint? Because even having to take a pay cut in itself is really, really difficult. How did you cope from that standpoint?
So I remember feeling really strongly that this was definitely a compromise that I was making, but it was sort of peppered with this sort of resentment that actually I needed to prove myself. I needed to get back. I needed to show that, you know, I could get back to where I was, because I saw it as a setback. And in reality, you know, financially, it was a setback at the point where I needed that more than ever to look after my daughter. It was gone. So what did I do? I worked harder. I did more. I took on more. And I think if I think about my own sacrifices at that point, you know, I worked really late into the evenings. I took on extra responsibilities because I wanted to show that I could do it all. And so did I sacrifice my own well-being at the time? Probably, but that felt like something that I needed to do. And I am so pleased nowadays that women don't have to do that. But that's what I felt I needed to do. And very quickly, you know, I did progress. I went from my role to being promoted, to having a bigger team, taking on more responsibilities, you know, award-winning work, all this kind of stuff that came with it. But during that time, if I think back personally, you know, I was quite lonely.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to say was that that's amazing that you were able to get through it. But there are so many people that have a different attitude towards it, especially when they're a single parent and they don't have that drive or ambition to get past it. So what advice can you give to them in terms of changing their mindset and really doing what's best for their child and pushing through?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that I would say, and I certainly struggled with this because I felt like I had to do it all on my own, is build a tribe. Just build a tribe.
Yeah.
Like, find people that you have stuff in common with that can support you. I mean, my second husband was in the military for a long time, and it wasn't until I had my second child, my son, and he would be taken away from me at a moment and go off, you know, for 6 months here and there, or even a few weeks, and missing key dates like birthdays and things. And I learnt to ask for help. I didn't need to make the birthday cake myself. The kids really didn't care, you know, but somebody needed to make it. So outsource stuff, get help, and build that tribe. I think that's a really, really important thing that you hear a lot more of, that people are not afraid to build those communities. I think that's where social media actually can be really great as well, because you are better connected. We didn't have a huge amount of that back in my day then. The other thing I think is worth... I've done some mentoring with individuals who are single parents. Somebody that I was talking to, she was a mum that had decided to have a child on her own. So she didn't have a partner. She just decided she wanted to be a single mum. That's the route she was going to take. But incredibly successful. But she was constantly apologising for everything because she was in that mindset. You talk about your mindset. She was in a place where, you know, I'm sorry, I've got to go because I've got to go and pick up my child. Or I'm sorry, I'll log on late. Don't worry, I'll log back on and I'll pick up. And so she was in that trap. And I said, why are you apologising?
Yeah, you don't need to give a reason for it. Yeah.
People have families. People have, whether they have families or not, actually they have responsibilities. People have pets. People have hobbies. You know, you're entitled to have this other part of your life. I think you and I have talked a little bit about how a lot of the work that we do is very intrinsic to the way that we exist and our being, and this kind of deep connection that it's very meaningful and it's an important part of your life. And I've always felt that work has been a really important part of my life.
Yeah.
The work that I do makes me happy, and if I didn't, then I wouldn't do it. But as I've got older, I think there's this question around balance. There will never, with parenting, there is never enough of you to go round, and there will always be something that happens, whether you do end up missing a sports day or something, or you know your kid goes into school and you've forgotten it's World Book Day, or whatever it is. There will always be something that happens. But overall, if you can try and achieve the right balance, and then if you get the balance wrong, because, you know, some days you do have to work a 15-16 hour day and you don't get there to put your kid to bed, you make sure that you do it the next day.
Yeah.
And so you overall, you somewhere or in the rounds, you get to that point of balance. But don't beat yourself up about it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
just
I
have to
agree with
accept
that.
it, right?
Yeah, you can't always be perfect. That's one thing I have learned with time, is that yes, we always strive for consistency in life, but ultimately, if you haven't been consistent one day, it's
Yeah.
okay. That day's gone. You can move on to the
Yeah.
next and be consistent that next day.
Yeah. And that
So-
is infectious. Like my children, when they look at me, they know I work hard, and they will come up with the same mantras. Like they say, Collings, don't quit. Because it's like, we don't quit, we carry on, and all this sort of thing. And it makes me chuckle because I don't say that to them, but they kind of have these little things where they just pick
That's
up.
really
in a sense,
good. Yeah.
They know. I don't have to tell them. They know. Homework first, get on with it, do what you have to do your jobs, then you can have your playtime and it's fine. So I think that there is definitely it's something in this around how the values that you hold as important, and the virtues that you have, right, connect to the way in which you live your personal life and what's important to you, as well as the way in which that infiltrates what you do at work.
Yeah, agreed. I want to talk to you about a topic that's very close to your heart. We touched on it just earlier, actually, and this is the topic of purpose and vision. And one thing that I've read about you is that you've always said that you've had a strong sense of purpose from a young age, which I find really intriguing, because not many young people can say that they have a strong sense of purpose or they know who they are, whereas you clearly know yourself, and over years you've probably you learn more as you go along. So my question to you is, how do you figure out what your purpose is in life if you don't know what motivates you, you don't know what gets you out of bed in the morning, and you don't know what drives you effectively?
Yeah. So let me go back to the beginning then, and talk about as a child. So yes, I think when I look back, yes, I had a strong sense of purpose, but could I have articulated it then? No. I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known if you'd said to me, and even throughout school, I knew that I had a curious mind, and I wanted to read everything, and I wanted to learn everything, and I was like a sponge. My mum, again, when I was doing my sort of prep for this, would say, you didn't want to play with the other kids. You wanted to sit and listen to what the adults were saying. You would sit with us and you would take it all in, and you would absorb everything, and this kind of constant need to be curious and learn. And I suppose if I think back to when I actually could articulate it, it was probably only about 3 or 4 years ago.
What?
Yeah. So I knew that I had this strong sense, and I knew that actually for me, purpose was really important to live a purposeful life, and that things felt wrong or right. But could I articulate it? And the point at which I really, about 4 years ago, the point at which I really unlocked it was I had to divest a business. So all my career up to this point was all about building things, growing things, building campaigns, building businesses, lots of growth-related things, initiatives, campaigns, whatever it might be. And even when I think back to at school, the creativity, the art, the making things, building things, growing things. And I was in a situation where I had to divest this business. So I was taking it down brick by brick. I was making 300 people redundant. I was selling off, and I was really confused and unfulfilled. And I was like, it was in COVID, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I sat down with an exec coach, and she said, just talk to me, talk this through with me. Oh, you know what this is? This is growth. Growth is my purpose, right? Everything that I do and everything I've done up to this point is all about growing my knowledge, growing my mind, growing things. I love gardening.
Yeah, I saw.
Everything in my personal life. I have my animals. I've got pigs and chickens and ducks. We make honey with the bees. Like we grow our own little chicks, and it's all about growth and so the art and all these things. And I invest in my children. And she was like, right, so you're not fulfilled because what you're doing is the opposite of growth. I'm like, that's it. That is it. So I took on a couple of NED roles, one in education, helping children to grow, and one with a mentoring network, again, about developing the next generation of leaders. And I started to fill my bucket. And so I started to feel better personally, but my work wasn't satisfying me, and it wasn't, and so everything felt out of kilter and balance. So my advice is start with what you love. Just what matters to you and what do you love? Because if you can find that, then you can figure out what you're supposed to be doing. Some people are motivated by helping others, or motivated by money and literally just want as much money as possible. Everyone's got these different senses of that direction and purpose, and so once you get that and you can articulate it, and if you can articulate it as early on as you can, then that's helpful. Because then when we were talking about this, what's the right thing to do, what's good, feels good, and how you make decisions, if you have that strong anchoring, then if someone says to me again, I want you to divest this business, I'm like, no, actually I could do it and I could do a really good job, and even if you paid me an awful lot of money, it probably wouldn't feel right.
Yeah. But the thing is, how do you know what you love? Especially if you haven't had those experiences yet in life, or you haven't really figured out what your passions are. I mean, even for me, I've struggled with figuring out what my purpose is. So I've always thought to myself, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? How can I best serve the world, right? And then what am I passionate about? And I found some of those questions really hard to answer. Yeah. And they sound like really simple questions, but actually, what am I passionate about is really difficult to answer, especially when you haven't cultivated those interests, perhaps early on in life,
or had the experiences that then allow you to say, I'm good at that. And actually that's different. What you're good at, because I'm good at lots of things, but they don't necessarily fulfill me. And I think that's where, it is something that you have to spend time and invest in, but as you get older, it's something you can get comfortable with and you can start to realise. And if you don't know what you love, try more stuff.
Okay. Trial and error.
A little bit, but you'll have a sense. You'll have a sense of, if anything, definitely what you don't love. And there's so many things. And there will be areas that might be interesting to you. There might be hobbies that you've had, and start with that. Because if you can start to work out in your personal life, go where it's easier first. Don't be too prescriptive about it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people worry about making the wrong decision, and that's something that I have always worried about. And so many things get in the way, like so many factors get in the way. So it might be for me, when I was growing up, it was about having a job that was well paid, making sure that there was a lot of pride that came to the job that I was doing. It was all about making sure, it was really about how other people would perceive me.
Recognition,
right? And actually, when you strip those layers back, it should be about what gives you energy and what interests you the most. But sometimes it's hard to figure that out, for sure.
It is. And I think what also, and I've seen with, as you get older and people, relatives get older, they lose that sense of purpose, because if they've spent all their careers working and that's been
their life.
Part of their life, a big part of their life, and then they retire, and then that's it. And if they haven't got that clear sense of purpose and they lose it, what happens next? What do they do? What do they spend their time doing? And I think, unfortunately through COVID, lots of people found that really challenging. And particularly my mum, she lives on her own, and she really struggled because she had a really fantastic voluntary role that she did in a hospital. And they were like, nope, you can't come in. Actually, that's your high risk category, and we can't have volunteers. And so she lost a lot of the connection and meaning in her life, and she knew that was a reason for her to continue. And there's interesting research actually where if you lead a more purposeful life, then I think you're 2.5 times less likely to get dementia when you're older.
What?
You are 22% less likely to exhibit the signs or the triggers for a stroke. So people, actually, there's like benefit to living a purposeful life. And if you think about it in kind of a personal context, why we exist is what purpose means, and personal purpose is about doing things that matter to you. And so there's a really strong connection with organisational purpose, so why organisations exist, and then why the work that you do in service of that matters. And there's a really strong connection there.
Yeah, I agree completely. One thing that I want to talk to you about is how your purpose can change as you progress through life. So as you hit certain milestones, you go from being a child to then being a teenager to then being an adult. What you want out of life changes. And so how does one go about navigating their way and redefining what their purpose is, especially when they're feeling a little bit lost and a little bit unsure about what to do next? I mean, you touched on it just now, that you could be doing a job for 40 years and then you retire. What next, right?
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that?
I think that if you have a really strong, clear purpose in life, the context around you changes and your circumstances may change, but you're still you, and so that doesn't really change. So I don't expect that I'm going to retire and then all of a sudden, you know, not going to be interested in or motivated by growth or having this clear sense of purpose. But as I've got older, I thought, actually, you know, I've got all this fantastic experience. Maybe I need to volunteer more of my time. Or actually, now I've got children and my growth context changes because it's important to me to make sure that they are taken care of and, you know, steer them in the right way, or whatever it is. Sometimes trigger events can happen. So heaven forbid, but somebody might get cancer or something like that causes you to really seriously question what your purpose in life is. And it's those moments of reflection, something that you really have to spend time working on in order to understand and unpick. And I'm a big fan. Have you heard of the 6-minute diary?
I think I have briefly, yeah.
So let me tell you about the 6-minute diary. So the 6-minute diary is it's how I start and bookend my days. So start and finish my days, and it's 3 minutes in the morning, 3 minutes in the afternoon, and essentially you write down what you how you're going to make your day great. You set some intentions, you create personal affirmation, and then you reflect at the end of the day about what was great, what good deed you've done, and that sort of reflectiveness, and deliberately asking about what good deed you have done for somebody else, so that you're not necessarily just thinking about yourself, you're thinking about others. And I think that it doesn't have to be that, but in some way, having mindfulness as part of your life is helpful to give you that reflection, so that you can connect and continue to connect to what's important for you, particularly for more senior executives, because we are pulled from pillar to post. You spend lots of time traveling, you know, and it's easy for you to say, I'll just do a few more calls, or I'll do calls in the car, or things will run into the evening, or, oh, actually, I'm sat watching a hockey match, I'm just going to sit in the car, I'm going to do a few emails, whatever it is. That inability to take time out for yourself to reflect and check and keep yourself on track, and recognise that actually if things are pivoting or moving in your life, because it doesn't happen overnight. Like, trigger events will happen, but most of the time it will be incrementally and you just won't realise it.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess what you're talking about is gratitude, right? It's like a gratitude journal almost. And I guess when you were touching on mindfulness, I mean, do you often practice mindfulness? Like, do you meditate? Or I
do meditate. Okay. And actually, my son particularly, he meditates with me before we go to bed. Yeah. And there are great apps for this. So many great apps where you can just, and even just for 10 minutes, but to help you sleep better, to help you just reset before you go to bed. I find it incredible. I do yoga.
Wow.
But I also know that if I don't do yoga, I really feel it. I really feel it in my mind, in my body, and my ability to actually operate. Now, again, all of this probably in the last sort of 5 years really has become part of what I would call my habits or my rituals, because before then, without really understanding how all of this played and connected together, I don't think I fully appreciated it. So I think that's the gift of spending some time on you.
Yeah, I agree that you have to first look after yourself before you can look after others. I think you talked about this in one of your posts, that you know, before you go and help other people, you have to make sure that you're okay. And
you put your own mask
on
first on the airline.
On the airline. On the airplane.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I want to talk about purpose in the context of work. We touched on this earlier in terms of organisational purpose. Now, McKinsey published an article in 2021 which stated that 70% of the 1,000 US employees they interviewed said that their sense of purpose is defined by their work. which makes sense, right? Additionally, people who live their purpose at work are more productive than people that don't. They're healthier, they're more resilient. When employees feel their purpose is aligned to the organisation's purpose, the benefits expand to include stronger employee engagement levels, which makes sense, of course, they're more productive. So as a CEO, as a purpose-led leader, which is what you describe yourself to be, how do you ensure that all of your employees' individual purposes, personal purposes, are aligned with the overall organisation's purpose?
Okay, so not all CEOs are the same, and I genuinely believe that different CEOs in different contexts are needed depending on what's going on. So when I talk about being a purpose-led leader, the way in which I go about things might be different to how a CEO from a different background actually approaches something. So an accountant, for example, might say, here's a set of numbers. This is what we need to deliver. How are we going to do it? And then they'll figure out what the approach is that they're going to take to deliver that. Because there might be lots and lots of different ways. For me, the way I start is I will look at what is the reason why that organisation exists. What is its purpose? So does it exist to play a particular role in society, in customers' lives? And once you've got that really clearly defined, then that's the first piece. Then you look at, okay, so we've got everyone on the right bus. They're all pointing in the right direction because they all know where they're heading. They're all looking out the same window. They all want to be on that bus because they're really clear about that destination. The values will be the way in which we actually deliver that. So we will say, are we going to be a caring organisation? Are we going to be honest? And what is the way in which we're going to deliver on our plans? And if we can get that right, then it allows us to move mountains because we can pivot really quickly. We can, make sure that actually if there's a change in direction or if something happens like COVID, you can say, right, we're all going to work from home, but it's all fine because everyone's all neatly aligned to where we're going and the way in which our values are going to guide us there. Then once you've got that bit nailed, you go, okay, so what's the behaviours that we will guide us as an organisation to the way in which we actually deliver? So the decisions that we make, the way in which those decisions are made, the way we operate together, this common language, this common set of understanding, what's on track or what's off track. And what's off track is as important as on track. So you have these kind of lived experiences, these examples that people can then reference that are linked to the values, right? So it's all beautifully seamlessly connected. Then once you've got your values, you recognise the good behaviours. So you see things, and then when you have your reward schemes and your recognition, you say, actually, we're going to celebrate because all of these things are great. People that are promoted are the ones that follow the way in which it's done around here as an organisation. And then you have organisational cues and rituals because all of those things are reinforced. And so that's what I define as being a purpose-led leader is when you bring all of these things together and you link them really neatly and you have your entire organisation talking a common language, understanding the way in which you do things around here, then it's easier, as I say, to see when things they don't fit. When they're not quite right, it sticks out like a sore thumb and people go, oh, hang on a minute, why is that? That decision's not in line with our values.
Yeah.
Or, and then if you are an employee coming into that business and you say, well, what's your culture? Because all of that adds up to being your culture. You say, well, actually, it's not, oh, it's great, we've got really nice people. It's actually, we're really open and honest, and this is the way in which we behave. And even if we deal with partners, this is really open and honest way. And if we deal with our, regulator or whatever it might be, or the government, we're really open and honest, and we're really consistent. And you can chart that through every decision in the way in which you operate. And it starts at the top. So I see myself as the custodian of that, and then I help people to grow through their careers, thinking back to my personal purpose, to say, actually, this is how we do things. Do you sign up to that as a way of operating, as a way of kind of coming to work? So if they can connect what they do day to day and what matters to them personally, then they can select to be part of the organisation, do it in the way that we do things. Then they know that actually their personal purpose lines. And some people might say, actually, do you know what, this isn't for me. Yeah. I self-select that this is not the right environment. My personal purpose doesn't align with what the organisation is trying to do. I'm out. So within my current business, actually lots of people join because of this strong sense of purpose, and they really feel it from the moment they join right the way through their journeys. And so we see really high internal progression because people come in and then they see the opportunity to move into different roles and develop their career.
One thing I want to ask you just on that is that, have you noticed any trends in relation to when you look at the different groups within the business? So it might be based on level of seniority, it might be based on age, sexual orientation, gender, for example. Have you noticed any trends where you can see that their purpose varies based on those different groups? So if you look at the women in the business versus the men in the business, for example, do you find that the women in the business, their purpose is aligned in a specific manner versus the men? Do you find a bit of a variation between the two?
And that's a really interesting question.
Hope I worded it okay.
No, I got it. It's not something I thought about, actually.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
So what I really love about, I think we're going to talk about gender a little bit.
Yeah.
But what I really love about the business at the moment is that, so for example, affinity groups have been created, but that's not because I've said that those affinity groups have to be created. Actually, they're self-created because they see an opportunity to bring like-minded people together to discuss things in a particular forum that aids them in their roles and their progression within the business. And I would say I haven't observed anything particularly different in purpose or sense of purpose necessarily, but I do see a very strong sense of everyone being connected to the organisation's purpose. How they go about it might vary.
Yeah.
But I really genuinely do believe that we have that really strong connection because it's something we invest time in. And that really does help us to, as I kind of describe, shortcut how we make decisions. So we're really more efficient. Because if you think about it, if you've got a language that everyone speaks and there's no confusion, you're going to be more efficient.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And you spend a lot of time at work. So that comes back to, you want to be happy. You want to know that the work that you do matters. And not everyone is ambitious and driven in the same way. Some people just want to come in, do their set hours and know that they're doing a good job and that's enough for them. That's completely fine. Doesn't mean that their work is any less valuable than anyone else's. But if they know that it matters and it has meaning and it's connected to something greater and that the sum of all of those parts adds up to something more valuable, then that's a pretty good place to be.
Yeah, I think so. And I find that, you were talking a lot about the fact that you may have certain core values, right? And especially when you're joining as a new employee, the business will have certain values, but whether they adhere to them is another question. And sometimes there's a misalignment, I found, with joining a business thinking this is going to be amazing. I'm going to join this multinational company that has all these wonderful values, but actually when I've joined, there's a misalignment. Actually, they're not really adhering to those values. So how do you stop that taking place, especially because you're the CEO of So Energy, and ultimately how do you ensure that people at middle management level and say lower than that are ensuring that they adhere to the same values, because it's difficult to manage those managers.
But then you come back to the consistency point around how you can have tools that do that. So we have a behaviour framework, for example, and we have mandatory conduct training that is linked to that framework, and so everyone has to go through it. And then we have a leadership program that is connected to the values that then links back to the behaviours, and that's the way that we do things. Through our recruitment process, we've spent a lot of time making sure that the individuals that we bring into the organisation understand the type of business that we are. And there have been individuals who are brilliant that we've interviewed and just said, actually, I think that what we're looking for here, perhaps this might not be right for you. Let's have a conversation about it. And we talk about it as part of our interview process, the way in which we do things. So I think there are tools that you can use to help reinforce that consistency.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it starts with the leaders and our leadership population, and they have to buy into that.
Yeah. No, Really, really useful advice. Let's talk about gender equality, because this is something that we've, spoken about at some length in the past. But I want to start off with your own experiences of gender inequality, right? Because you were in a circle surrounded by 7 other individuals. Those 7 other individuals happened to be men, right? You're the only female in that room. And those individuals were at different levels of seniority. Some of them were direct reports. And the individual that was leading the session was asking every single person to introduce themselves. And when they got to you, they bypassed you, they effectively overlooked you, and they went to the next person. Talk to me about that time, and also what would you do differently now looking back?
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
Completely shocking.
It is shocking.
Right? You don't expect to go to work and for that to happen to you. I mean, I got up that morning and I was going to this event, and that would not have crossed my mind that actually I would need to be prepared to deal with that kind of situation. And I remember standing in the circle, and I was waiting patiently. The person who was leading the introductions was directly opposite, and they were walking, going around and kind of waiting patiently. Right, yes, going to save my name and all the rest of it, like hurry up, get on with it, and making sure that I project my voice nicely and all that kind of stuff, because I'm quite short, and so I often find myself in situations where I am the only female in the room, but I'm also only 5 foot tall.
Yeah.
So, high five. Yeah. But I have to then be a bit taller, physically present. So I was said the person to my left, who was one of my direct reports, introduced themselves, and I was maintaining eye contact. I was watching. I was like, and the eyes did not come to me. They went straight to the person and said, hello, to the person on my right. And I was like, oh. And the person on my right said, oh, actually, I think you missed Monica.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
And so I was like, but by this point, my puffed up, feathery, like here I am, deflated, completely deflated. I was just like, is this me? And actually, the first thought that went through my head was, perhaps he just didn't see me, which is a ridiculous thing, completely ridiculous thing to think. But that was, as a short person, I was just like, maybe he just didn't see me.
Yeah.
There was no way. I mean, there was a big gap. We were in a circle. There was no way he didn't see me. So I mumbled my introduction and felt rubbish about it because I wasn't clear or anything. I didn't say what I wanted to say, and I just said my name and moved on. And then we went and we were at a lunch, and we had the lunch and all the rest of it. And I was seething because I was just like, gosh, did that really just happen to me?
Yeah.
And I was, and I kept questioning in my mind. At the end of the event, this person came over and said something. And so I had a second opportunity then where I could have said to him, why did you ignore me? And I didn't. And I went home and I sat around the dinner table, and it was like quite an important event. And the kids were like, what did you have for lunch? What was your day like? Da, 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 da. And so I retold the story. And my son, my youngest, said, oh, Mum, I feel really sorry for you. That must have been really awful. I'm so sorry. I said, oh, thank you, darling. And my daughter was, if I were you, I'd have stuck a fork in his eye. And I was like, right, good, okay, excellent, strong-minded individual that she is.
Yeah.
And my husband said, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you call him out on it? Like, what would you have done? And I just at that point, I was just so shocked by it, and I just couldn't get over it.
Yeah.
It was just I didn't expect it, and I wasn't expecting it, and I didn't know what to say. And I ought to have said something. And I think, on reflection, if I was in a different situation, I perhaps would have done. And other things have happened to me since. I mean, most recently, and I've written about this on LinkedIn as well, I try and share these experiences that people know that these things happen to me too. And as a chief executive, if they happen to me, then they will definitely happen to other people.
Yeah.
I went to another event. I was asked to sit on a gentleman's knee.
Yeah, I read that post.
And I was just like, ugh. Yeah. And actually, the Women's Affinity group, one of the groups that I mentioned, took that as an example, and they worked with it as a story to say, well, actually, what would you do in that situation? And there was loads of debate because different people, different characteristics, different levels of bravery, different situations in terms of their personal experiences to that point. How would they react? And there was such variety from everyone from, outrage to raising complaints and writing to his boss and all this sort of stuff, right the way through to actually I wouldn't say anything. Because women have a fear that if they speak out and say something, it might damage their career. And that came out really clearly in the group. For me in that circle, it wasn't that. It was actually shock that I was being treated in that way.
Yeah. I think the thing is it's uncomfortable, right? And ultimately, I think when you're the only woman in the room, it's hindsight's a great thing, but the reality is that when you're the only woman in the room and, for example, you gave we talked about being overlooked. A lot, at the back of your head, in my head, I'd be thinking, well, it's not a big deal. Like, just move on. But actually, it is a big deal. And, we should be talking about it. And this brings me on to the point of marginalization. And it's these little small behaviors that actually are a huge deal. And then they, add up and it turns into something bigger than it is. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, I read that at the Powerful Women's Conference, which you attended and you're heavily involved in, there are a lot of women putting their hands up in terms of whether they'd been asked to take minutes or make tea, being the only woman in the room, right? And for the kind of the other side of me, not me, but the voice in my head is saying, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. But no, it is a big deal, right? So how do we change that mentality, right? Because ultimately, if you're being treated in that way, like you said, if you're being treated in that way, what is it like for other women?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because if you go back to my circle example, the person who reported to me to my left, who said their introduction just before me, didn't even realise that it had happened. Right, they didn't see it. Now, whether that's because they did their introduction and then they just sort of turned away and then that was it, but that kind of allyship is really important because if you're the only woman in a room, then you need male allies around you who are going to stand up for you and recognise when these kinds of behaviours happen and when they're not okay, and actually to give you the support and comfort because you're peers and you need that from somewhere. And if there are no other women that are out looking for you and looking out for you, you're not going to get that. Yeah. So more men need to step up to be allies, and we see it more frequently. There are awards now for male allyship, which is great because actually that's part of how we solve this. I also think that women need to speak out and not be afraid to speak out, and that's really, really hard because being marginalised creates imposter syndrome. And this is something I've done some breakfast sessions on. I actually don't really like the phrase imposter syndrome because if you think about syndromes, like
that's what I was thinking.
They're like horrible labels.
Yeah, it's like you have a condition,
yes,
and it shouldn't be like that.
No, but there's one I can't remember the name of the person, but they talk about imposter phenomenon.
Okay.
Because it's something that comes and goes, a bit like a tornado. Right. So you get this flash of emotion, which might be in that situation where you're in that room and you're the only woman, and then you get these feelings and they affect you, and then you walk out the room and you might be perfectly fine. Yeah. But actually in that moment, what you'll need and what you're looking for is support and help. And so where do you get that from? And actually what we really need ultimately is gender equality, and we need more women to be in that room so that they're not marginalised, so you're not the only one. Until there are more people like me, then I will be alone. And so that takes a level of resilience, and by resilience I mean not just actually just being tough and strong, but the ability to bounce back when these things happen to you, and respond to them. As that's why I take such a strong personal responsibility to champion how we as an industry and how we as business leaders can actually move on from this and change the context to make things better for the next generation of leaders.
Yeah. What advice would you give to younger women that are perhaps new to the energy sector or any sector for that matter, and are trying to break into an area that's traditionally been considered male dominated? How should they respond to situations of conflict or perhaps this feeling of being marginalized, where they're overlooked, or because it's difficult? And I think when I think back to you know, when I graduated, if something like that had happened to me, I would have just thought, you know, get over it, move on, it's fine. But actually, you know, like I said before, it's not fine. So what advice would you give to them?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard, isn't it? Because I spent a lot of my early career working in very male-dominated industries, and I tried to behave like men.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean,
I
you've
did
done the
as well.
same, right?
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
it as well. Where you can't, it's like you can't be
You try and fit
emotional.
in.
Yeah, you do. You feel I can't be emotional. I have to behave like the person next to me, and actually, I can't express who I truly am, and that's difficult.
And that's hard work.
Yeah,
because you're pretending to be something that
you're
you're not.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the defining characteristics of my leadership style is that I am authentic, because actually this is me, and it's hard trying to be somebody that you're not. So I behave in the way that I do. I actually, you know, earlier on in my career, someone slight sidetrack.
Yeah,
It's
for
good.
it.
It's
No,
good.
go
Right?
for it.
So I was told I had a ridiculous poker face, that I was really rubbish at it, and that I couldn't do it, and that people could always read my face. And so I went to acting lessons to try and get a better one. Right, because I thought that was the answer, that to try and fit in, I would try and just be able to mask my emotions. And then in the end, like, I just thought, this is really rubbish and it's really hard work. Why don't I just say what I think rather than holding back? Just express my feelings there and then. And I let it all go. And at that point, you think, well, you don't have to have a poker face. You don't have to. I mean, obviously you have to engage stakeholders and, you know, moderate language and all that sort of thing, and read the room.
Yeah.
But as an authentic leader, if you can genuinely be yourself, you're consistent. People know what they're going to get. And so all of that connects to mean that you can be a better leader because you're not trying to be anyone else. So for people who are in those situations, one of the big things that I believe young women benefit from is sponsorship. So if you are in a middle management role, or, you know, earlier on in your career, having somebody, and it might be a woman, it might be a man, probably a man really, who can put your name in the right place, in the right conversations. They'll give you the progress and the support and the help that you need. If there's a cool project and you want to be in, talk to somebody who can help you to be the person that says, actually, do you know what, I've got a really great person, have you thought about this? Or whatever. Because that will advance, and that ability to network. And if I think about even going back to the single mother conversation, you don't really go out to be able to network when you're a single mum. So you need people to help you.
Yeah.
So how do you make those connections that can break down some of those barriers for you? It's really, really important.
Yeah. But you have to be prepared to ask for help. And that often is the problem, right? It's you don't want to be perceived as weak, or you don't want to be perceived as asking for too much. And that's sometimes the thing that stops you, I think.
But when have you ever asked anyone for help and they've not helped you?
They've always helped.
Yes.
Yeah. And they're
And that's
willing
it.
to. There's no ego attached to that. They're willing to do it.
So what holds us back is ourselves, because we are frightened. And if we let go of that fear, let go of the fear of walking into a room, let go of the fear of asking for help, then we stop holding ourselves back, and then we'll fly.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I think it's a story that we tell ourselves, and it's on loop, right? It's just what you keep telling yourself is what ultimately ends up happening. So no, for sure. I want to talk about the statistics in relation to gender equality, specifically within the energy sector. Now, let's talk about the challenge that we're faced with. According to Powerful Women's 2023 report, 16% of executive board seats in the UK energy sector are held by women, so very low. 74% of top UK energy companies have no women in executive board seats, and women overall make up 31% of leadership roles in the UK energy sector. Similar question to the last. What needs to change in your opinion?
Oh gosh, so much. But let me start by saying we need diversity to deliver net zero. It's really important, because we need that innovation, and it needs to come from all four corners of our society. We need our workforces to be more representative of the customers and communities that we serve. That has to happen, because otherwise, how can we actually develop products and services that meet their needs?
Yeah.
You won't.
Yeah.
You just won't. So that's why it's so critical. And we need people to move into the sector, but we need them to stay. And so we have to create the environments where those people can thrive, where those women actually feel comfortable. So take an oil rig, for example. If you are asking a woman to put on a male outfit because there is no female version of it, they're going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to fit particularly well. You know, it doesn't make sense. But that's where the industry has been. That's what they've done for years. And so now it's about recognising, but not only that, what about people who might need to wear alternative items of clothing, like a hijab or something?
Yeah.
You know, so actually we should be more inclusive in the environments that we create. Certainly within my business, we've thought about the physical environment. I talked about, you know, breastfeeding mothers. We're actually creating dedicated spaces to allow people to do that expression of milk. We've got multi-faith rooms so that people can go and pray. And these are all built and bespoke to recognise the fact that we have a very diverse workforce. So I think that's really important, to make sure that we create the right environment so that people join and that they stay, because a lot of women will join the industry and think, actually, I can help be part of the, you know, the change, and then find it really hard and find it a battle. And if it's a battle and they can go and work somewhere else and it's going to be easier, why would they battle if the industry is battling against them? And so that's where the work of powerful women and organisations like Tide are really great, because there are commitments and they're asking leaders to make those commitments. The Energy Leaders Coalition is a group I sit on with lots of the top CEOs from across the energy companies across the UK, and we sit in a room and we talk about, you know, the dark underbelly of what's really going on and how we can improve things. We talk about performance and metrics and hold each other to account on it, because otherwise, unless you track it, it doesn't change. I think the other point I'd really make is we need to focus on the pipeline. So bringing people up through the industry, you know, starting at the grassroots with apprenticeship schemes, and making sure that those women join the industry and then have those career paths all the way through, so that we are building that future capability that we need, particularly in terms of net zero.
Yeah, no, and I like the fact that you mentioned apprenticeship schemes, because I think traditionally it's always been do your degree, you know, go to university and then go and find a job, a graduate entry role. But actually there are alternative routes. Yeah, there are alternative routes, and why would businesses not appreciate that and consider that? So no, I really, really like that. I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at So Energy, and this forms part of the last question. So in terms of the stats, 44% of senior leaders at So Energy are female. 32% of roles are filled by women. In junior roles, it's 36%. Now, you are committed to achieving 50% of women in middle management and senior leadership positions by 2025. In your view, how are you going to go about achieving that?
So it's stretching. And it's deliberately stretching.
Okay.
But we are a business that's growing. So in some ways, you know, legacy businesses will find it harder because they're coming from a different place, but we're adding to our workforce. And so it should be easier for us to create those opportunities to bring people in. We have what I would call a belonging strategy rather than a diversity strategy. And what I mean by that is that we want to create an organisation where people feel like they can bring their genuine, authentic selves to work and they can belong. So we talked about the physical environment, that's part of it. There's also the policies that we develop and the ways in which we create that environment, but to make sure that we get that consistency so that people are treated fairly. We also recognise we can't do it on our own. So there's partnerships that we need in order to do that. So I don't know if you've heard of Circle.
No, I haven't. No.
Right, so Circle's a really cool organisation where they actually help break down social mobility as an issue. So people from less privileged backgrounds are brought through leadership and development and training courses. And so that's a programme that we've brought into our business, and we're actually seeing the first graduates and the first people actually applying for our roles, which is beautiful, because this partnership's created opportunities for those individuals that they might not otherwise have had, and we certainly wouldn't have benefited from. There's also organisations like Code First Girls to get women into technology. And as a tech business that has its own proprietary technology systems, platforms, we want to see that balance across our organisation, because if we bring women in and say, hey, that's it, we've ticked a box and they're all in customer care, for example, actually, does that really solve what we're looking for? Because what we want is that genuine representation across our business. So doing that through partnerships. You mentioned the Powerful Women Conference, and I sat on a panel and there was one brilliant question that came across which said, okay, so you're doing all this work in your business, but what about your supply chain? What are you doing with them? And I sat there, I was like, don't have a great answer to this question, and it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I took it away and I chewed it over. And so what we launched a few weeks ago, was the contract beyond a contract, which is a commitment that our partners sign up to share their diversity stats with us as well as a business, so that we can say, okay, this is where we're at, but we're not stopping there. Actually, what we want to do is track our supply chain, but also we want to work with them, recognizing that we're still learning. We don't have all the answers. We want to help them take the best of what they've got, use that, share that across the group. We also want to be able to take some of the policies that we've developed and maybe share that with some other parts of our supply chain that don't have those policies. So it's that collaboration that's also needed, which is very much in line with our values and the way in which we do business.
Yeah. Very exciting. No, it's really, really good. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's nice to see you, Shivani.